Welcome to Book Buzz Reviews and Summaries. What if your greatest power wasn't wealth, position, or brute strength, but your ability to think, speak, and act with precision in the face of chaos? Imagine standing in a room where tempers are high, stakes are higher, and the future hangs by a thread. You have no money to offer, no authority to demand, no leverage to threaten, just your words, your insight, and your courage. Now imagine walking out of that room with an agreement in hand, peace where there was once deadlock, progress. Where there was once paralysis, victory. Not for one side, but for all. This is not fantasy. It's not luck. It's the art and science of negotiating the impossible in a world increasingly divided, where conflicts harden and cooperation seems elusive. The real game changers are not those who dominate the boardroom or shout the loudest in political arenas. The real heroes are the ones who master the quiet power of strategic negotiation, those who turn breakdowns into breakthroughs, who transform standoffs into stepping stones. And make no mistake, these are not just global diplomats or high-powered CEOs. They are people like you. In this book, Deepak Malhotra, a Harvard Business School professor and world-renowned negotiation expert, reveals how to solve the unsolvable. Drawing from war zones, business crises, and personal impasses, he proves that even when you have nothing to bargain with, you are never truly out of options. So, whether you're navigating a corporate crisis, rescuing a relationship, or confronting an impossible decision, the question isn't if you can change the outcome. It's whether you're willing to see that the tools you need are already in your hands, because when you understand how to negotiate the impossible, impossibility itself becomes just another obstacle, waiting to be overcome. Part 1. The Hidden Forces That Make or Break a Negotiation. Chapter 1. Negotiating Without Power, a Dangerous Game. Imagine you're in a room where everything is stacked against you. You have no money to offer, no authority to enforce, no leverage to speak of. Most people would walk away, but Deepak Malhotra says don't, because that's when the real game begins. In this chapter, Malhotra introduces us to the impossible, negotiations where stakes are high, emotions are raw, and options seem non-existent. Think hostage crises, wartime diplomacy, corporate deadlocks, or even family feuds that have gone on for years. He debunks the myth that you need money, muscle, or mandates to win. Instead, he offers a daring premise. Some of the most intractable problems can be solved using creativity, empathy, and trust. Even when you seem to have nothing to offer, Malhotra's thesis, power is overrated, influence, understanding, and ingenuity often have more impact. Key takeaway: power is not a prerequisite to negotiate effectively. Sometimes, having nothing to offer can be your greatest strength if you know how to use it. Chapter 2. The First Principle, the Power of Framing. Here's where the rubber hits the road. Framing is all about perception. How an issue is presented determines how it is understood, and thus, how it's resolved. Malhotra recounts riveting real-life scenarios where a simple reframing, changing how an issue was described or understood, radically transformed deadlocks. In one case, two companies were on the verge of collapsing their merger. The only thing that broke the standoff, a single word reframed. Example: when parties were arguing over control in a merger, reframing it to governance responsibilities shifted focus from ego to roles and saved the deal. Framing is not about spinning or deceiving, it's about clarity and redefinition. It's giving both sides a new lens to see the situation, one where solutions emerge organically. Hook for listeners: what if the argument you're stuck in isn't about what you think it's about? And what if changing a single word could flip the outcome? Chapter 3. Process before substance. Before you get to the what, you need to agree on the how. Malhotra stresses that process is a secret weapon in negotiation. Negotiators often rush to discuss the deal terms, but in complex negotiations, how you talk is more important than what you say. Should we meet face-to-face? Use a mediator. Talk informally first. Set a timeline. By crafting the process collaboratively, you create shared ownership and reduce the fear of being outmaneuvered. This is vital when emotions run high or when trust is low. Tactic: invite the other side to co-create the process. You don't dictate the rules. You build the game together. This signals respect and builds momentum, and here's the kicker. Process disagreements are less emotionally charged. People will compromise more easily on how to talk, which can break the ice and build trust for harder talks ahead. Lesson: when the deal feels impossible, stop negotiating the deal and start negotiating the process. Chapter 4: Sequence and Timing. The art of playing chess, not checkers. Great negotiators don't just focus on what to say, they focus on when to say it. Malhotra dives into the often overlooked element of sequencing: who talks to whom, in what order, and at what moment. These choices can dramatically shape the narrative and build coalitions that shift the power balance. Case in point, in a multinational conflict, one faction was resistant to any agreement, but by approaching a secondary party first and offering them symbolic concessions, the author created a ripple effect of support that left the main holdout isolated and willing to compromise. Strategic sequencing can change perceptions of legitimacy, break alliances, reframe the problem before anyone says no. It's like chess. One piece moved at the right time can change the whole board. Part 2: Building Trust, Making Concessions, and Creating Leverage Without Power. Chapter 5: Trust, the Currency of the Powerless. What if the one thing that decides your fate in a high-stakes negotiation can't be measured? No budgets, no contracts, just trust. In Deadlocked Negotiations, Malhotra emphasizes that trust is the true currency, especially when you have no money or muscle to offer. Without trust, logic fails. Offers are questioned. Even goodwill is seen as manipulation. Real-life insight. In the historic Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt, trust between bitter enemies was non-existent, but a slow, personal approach, private conversations, symbolic gestures, and time away from formalities created the thin threads of trust that eventually wove a peace deal. Malhotra notes that trust is fragile, but paradoxically, it grows fastest when both parties become vulnerable. By revealing something important, or even admitting a weakness, you invite reciprocity. Tactic: start small, deliver on little promises, show consistency, let trust accumulate, like interest on a bank account. Hook for listeners. What if earning trust isn't about being perfect, but about being consistently human? Chapter 6: Concessions, the Hidden Leverage of Giving Something Up. Here's the twist. Concessions aren't signs of weakness. They can be your most powerful moves. If made strategically, Malhotra argues that in Deadlocks, a smart concession can break the ice, signal goodwill, and shift momentum, but timing and delivery are critical. Mistake to avoid. Making a concession too early can make you look desperate, making it too late can seem like a bribe, and making it without signaling its cost makes it look cheap. Power move. When offering a concession, frame it as costly or risky for you. This increases its perceived value. Better yet, ask for something small in return, even symbolic, because people value what they've earned, not what they've been handed. Example: in a complex business negotiation, a party made a gesture by offering a better payment schedule, but only after clearly explaining why it was difficult to approve. That simple framing elevated the gesture into a relationship-building milestone. Insight: concessions aren't giveaways, they're investments, and the ROI: trust, influence, and momentum. Chapter 7: Symbols and Gestures, the Language Beyond Logic. When logic fails, use symbolism. Malhotra dives into the underappreciated power of symbolic actions, gestures that transcend spreadsheets and contracts. These are the acts that touch emotion, not just intellect. Historic moment. After the Berlin Wall fell, East and West German officials used symbolic reunification acts, joint press conferences, public handshakes, and shared dinners to solidify deals that logic alone couldn't secure. Sometimes, just sitting down at the same table, using the right title, or walking into a room together sends a louder message than any contract ever could. Tactic: use rituals, symbols, or even silence to send powerful signals. These actions humanize, dignify, and de-escalate. Tip for tough talks: if you're stuck, stop arguing over the facts. Ask yourself, what gesture would shift the emotional temperature of this conversation? Chapter 8: creating leverage without power. Now, here's the million-dollar question. How do you create leverage when you have none? Malhotra reveals a truth rarely acknowledged in power-driven negotiations. Perceived alternatives are more powerful than actual ones. You don't need another deal. You need the illusion that you're not dependent on this one. Classic strategy. A tech startup negotiating with a large investor appeared to be out of options. But by subtly referencing conversations with other strategic partners, they changed. The power dynamic, the investor, fearing competition, improved their offer. Fast, leverage comes from how the other side sees your position, not what your position actually is. Playbook tip. Use ambiguity strategically, let people assume you have options, don't lie, but don't overshare either. And here's the kicker. Even sheer desperation can become a source of leverage when both sides realize they need a deal. Urgency creates cooperation. Key insight. The perception of power can outweigh actual power, and how you tell your story shapes that perception. Part 3. Allies, Empathy, and the Art of Defusing the Impossible. Chapter 9. The Power of Invisible Influencers. Some of the most influential voices in any negotiation aren't even in the room. Malhotra introduces a game-changing idea. Invisible stakeholders, people who aren't directly at the table but whose opinions shape what's possible. They can be board members, spouses, advisors, mentors, or even the media. Case example. In one negotiation between two multinational corporations, one CEO wouldn't budge. The opposing party stopped pressing harder, and instead targeted the board members with a strategic presentation. Days later, the CEO changed his stance and the deal moved forward. Malhotra calls this influence without engagement. You're not negotiating with the person in front of you, you're negotiating with their world. Tactic. Map the stakeholders behind your counterpart. Who do they trust? Who do they fear? Find subtle ways to reach or influence them. Takeaway. Sometimes, the key to breaking a deadlock is persuading someone your counterpart listens to more than they listen to you. Listener hook. What if your next big win comes not from talking louder at the table, but from whispering to the people behind it? Chapter 10. Empathy, the most misunderstood skill in negotiation. Most people treat negotiation like war. Empathy, they assume, is weakness, but Malhotra says the opposite is true. Empathy is your sharpest blade when talks turn ugly, but let's clear something up. Empathy isn't agreement, it's understanding. Definition. Empathy is demonstrating that you understand the other party's perspective, constraints, and motivations, even if you disagree. In high-conflict situations, when people feel seen and understood, they lower their guard, defensiveness fades. Problem-solving begins. Example. In a tense labor negotiation, one side paused the bargaining and simply said, "We know you're under immense pressure from your workers. We would be too if we were in your shoes." That moment of recognition diffused weeks of hostility in minutes. Malhotra emphasizes this. You cannot solve a problem you don't understand, and you cannot understand a person you haven't listened to. Tool. Try. Mirroring. Repeat the other party's concern back to them in your own words. If they say, "Yes, that's exactly what I meant," you're on the path to progress. Emotional hook. What if showing someone that you understand them is the most persuasive thing you can do? Chapter 11. Defusing, dealing with toxic or irrational opponents. Here's the nightmare scenario. What if the person across the table doesn't want a deal? What if they're angry, bitter, or irrational? Malhotra doesn't shy away from this. He offers real-world strategies to deal with the seemingly undealable. 1. Disarm. Don't escalate. When attacked, the natural reaction is to fight back, but escalating emotion rarely brings clarity. Instead, validate their emotion without endorsing their actions. I can see how frustrating this must be for you. Is not surrender, it's strategy. It softens their defenses and shifts the tone. 2. Separate the person from the problem. Many toxic negotiators blur personal conflict with business issues. Your job is to reframe. Example, in a tribal land dispute, a mediator reframed the issue from, "Who owns this land?" to, "How can both groups honor their ancestors?" Suddenly, enemies became co-creators. 3. Introduce third parties. When direct talks get toxic, bring in a neutral party. A respected mediator can depersonalize the conflict and make both sides more accountable. Insight. It's harder to yell at each other when someone else is watching. 4. Use process as a reset button. If everything is falling apart, don't try to salvage the content. Go back and renegotiate the process line to use. Can we take a break and revisit how we're approaching this? I don't think this format is helping either of us. Listener cliffhanger. What if the most stubborn person in your life isn't stubborn? They're just not being heard the right way. Chapter 12. Lessons from the Edge. When failure isn't an option. This chapter is where Malhotra shares his most intense case studies. Peace treaties, nuclear de-escalations, and corporate hostage negotiations, where failure wasn't just costly, it was catastrophic, real-world insight. In one high-stakes case, negotiators were trapped in a game of brinkmanship. Progress seemed impossible, but one side introduced shared storytelling, asking both parties to create a hypothetical, successful future together. That exercise changed everything. Suddenly, they weren't opponents. They were collaborators with a common vision. Malhotra's key takeaway here: when everything is on the line, logic won't save you. Only creativity, empathy, and courage will. These aren't soft skills, they're survival tools. Part 4. Sealing the deal, avoiding disaster, and knowing when to walk away. Chapter 13. Momentum, the silent force behind every successful deal. Malhotra starts the final stretch with a surprising insight. Once you've built momentum in a negotiation, your biggest threat isn't resistance, it's overconfidence. Real example. In a multi-party international arms control negotiation, talks were going smoothly, but then came a pause. One party assumed everything was done and loosened its efforts. The deal stalled. Tensions rose. And the window of opportunity began closing fast because they underestimated the fragility of progress. Lesson. Momentum is not automatic. It's an engine that needs fuel, frequent communication, reaffirmation of shared goals, and constant alignment of expectations. Malhotra's move. When progress is being made, double down on relationship building and lock in small, incremental commitments. Think of it as closing the deal in layers, not in one dramatic signature. Hook for listeners. What if the moment things feel easiest is the moment you're most at risk of losing it all? Chapter 14. Beware the mirage, the danger of premature agreement. Just because both sides say yes doesn't mean the deal is real. Malhotra warns of the mirage deal, an agreement that sounds good, feels good, but hasn't addressed key landmines buried beneath the surface. Common scenario. Two teams agree to merge, everyone smiles, press releases go out, but then the deal collapses because no one clarified what integration actually meant or who would be CEO post-merger. Lesson. Never confuse agreement in principle with agreement in practice. Practical tip. Before declaring victory, test the deal, walk through real-world implementation scenarios, ask, what could go wrong? Who needs to sign off? What might this look like in 6 months? Listener challenge. Can you spot the difference between a real solution and a convenient illusion? Chapter 15. Knowing when to walk away. This is the hardest truth of all. Not every negotiation should end in agreement. Malhotra argues that the most disciplined negotiators aren't the ones who push hardest, but the ones who know their boundaries and stick to them. They don't get seduced by sunk costs or fear of looking like a failure. Powerful example. In a billion-dollar deal between a tech company and an international distributor, months of work had gone into it, but in the final hour, one side realized the long-term risks outweighed the rewards. They walked away. Years later, it was clear. That failed deal saved them from financial disaster. Core insight. If you don't know your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA, you don't know when to walk. Malhotra's rule. Never negotiate just to get a deal. Negotiate to get a deal worth having. And if that's not possible, you walk. Quietly, calmly, powerfully. Listener reflection. When was the last time you stayed in something just because you had already invested too much to leave? Chapter 16. Negotiating the impossible. A final framework. In the final chapter, Malhotra distills his core message. You don't need money, power, or force to win impossible negotiations. You need creativity, credibility, and connection. He offers 3 final pillars. 1. Mindset. View constraints not as roadblocks, but as creative challenges. Impossible doesn't mean unsolvable, it means the solution requires a new lens. 2. Process over outcome. Don't fixate on the finish line. Focus on creating a fair, respectful, transparent process. A good process creates its own momentum. 3. People first. Never forget, all negotiations are human. Even billion-dollar deals are built on emotion, ego, fear, and hope. Treat people accordingly. Final story. In a high-conflict diplomatic negotiation, both parties stopped talking for days. They communicated only through their aides. Then one night, both leaders met in private, not to talk policy, but to talk about their children. The next morning, the deadlock broke. Not because the facts changed, because the relationship did. Conclusion: from impossible to inevitable. You've now journeyed through every stage of Deepak Malhotra's masterclass on negotiation, breaking deadlocks without power, building trust through empathy and gestures, creating leverage without alternatives, defusing toxic counterparts, sustaining momentum, and knowing when to walk. Final takeaway for listeners: negotiation is not about beating someone, it's about building something, even when the odds say it can't be done. Whether you're closing a billion-dollar deal or trying to find peace at the dinner table, you can negotiate the impossible if you learn to do it right. Read the book to learn more. Thanks for listening to Book Buzz reviews and summaries.